Hi, I'm Matt Mombrea, CTO at Cypress North.
And hi, I'm Jonathan Nalewajek, Senior Software Engineer at Cypress North.
And before we get into our topic today, I had a couple of news items I wanted to point out. One for any of you PHP Laravel developers out there. There's a pretty serious exploit making its rounds right now that we're seeing actively compromising some applications. If you use Laravel Livewire, and specifically version 3 of Livewire, there is a malicious exploit that allows remote execution of code and also management of the file system through your Laravel application. So what you need to do is check your packages and see if you're on version 3.6.4 or lower. If you're lower than 3.6.4, you need to upgrade your package to at least that level to mitigate this issue. And on the sites that we've seen being compromised, basically what's happening is the exploit is allowing a bot to insert files into the public directory, which results in a variety of issues. Sometimes they are putting redirects to some random site on your site. Sometimes they're loading malicious files. So it's kind of a big deal. I would make sure that you update your packages in any Laravel Livewire project immediately. The second item I wanted to point out is for managed WordPress hosting. It's kind of been a long journey to find a great solution. John and I have hosted sites in a huge variety of ways, from bare metal to VPSs to managed providers. We had been with Kinsta as our managed WordPress provider. We still are for about 6 years now. And recently they've made a shift in their underlying infrastructure. So it used to be on Google Cloud Platform, which we liked. The performance was really good. The stability was great, obviously leveraging Google's global infrastructure. But recently they've made a move that has not been transparent at all, where they're calling it an upgrade to certain data centers, locations. But what they're really doing is changing the underlying hosting provider infrastructure entirely. And we only found out about this because some of our sites we host in the London data center, it was going through one of these upgrades, which in the past meant they were moving to more powerful compute on Google Cloud Platform. But this time they moved their entire infrastructure away from Google Cloud to the Oracle Cloud. And they didn't let anyone know that they were doing this. It was kind of a footnote in a document somewhere. But when they send out these emails, they say, hey, we're upgrading our infrastructure. And in the past, it's happened a lot, and it's just been more powerful machines on Google Cloud. So what happened last week was they migrated their London data center to Oracle, which brought down everything. They took out their entire data center. It was offline for almost 10 hours, which is completely unacceptable. Obviously, our clients were very upset. We're still dealing with kind of the fallout of that. What's even worse is they haven't even put out a postmortem on the issue. They haven't talked to anyone about it, and they're still not disclosing the fact that they're migrating away from Google Cloud. And for a lot of us, and us included, Google Cloud was a selling point. We want to be on that infrastructure. We trust it. It's part of the reason we chose them. And now it sounds like a cost-cutting measure. They think it's going to be cheaper for equal or better performance with Oracle, but I don't buy that. I'm concerned, and anyone hosting on Kinsta should also be concerned. I know at Cypress North, we're going to be reevaluating our managed provider for WordPress. We host hundreds of sites, and only the one data center I'm aware of has been migrated to Oracle, and it was a complete failure. It was a horrible process. They dropped the ball. No one knew what was going on, even at Kinsta. So watch out for that. Be aware if you're hosting on Kinsta. Pay attention and see, make sure everything is working as expected. And if you get a notice that your data center region is going to be upgraded, be on alert because things probably will go wrong if London is any indicator.
Yeah, it might all be okay, but it's always bad when the first one is some kind of failure like this, where
not
sites are down for hours. That's never good. So
Yeah, and I don't know if that was their first attempt at this migration because, like I said, they haven't been transparent, which is a huge red flag. But maybe it'll be okay. Since it's stabilized, it has been fine. I don't really notice any difference, but a lot of trust lost there.
yeah.
And we'll be looking at other options or seeing how this plays out. Okay, so into our main topic today. Last month, we talked about AI and where it's headed for software development. Today, we want to discuss what is working for us and what is not working when it comes to AI agentic coding and what we've tried and what we've found so far. So, John, I know you have spent some time playing around with some personal projects, exploring how these tools work and seeing what they can do and what they can't do. What have you seen so far in your experience?
So just to give some background that is maybe important for some of the technical people out there, I started going down this route of setting up a Laravel project with standard Laravel 12 install using Livewire, Livewire version 4, and I've got Laravel Boost installed, which is kind of like their package to help some of these agentic models. It provides some MCP servers to do different things that help with the development process. And in terms of the models I've been using, well, I've been using Anti-Gravity for my IDE, and I've been using Claude Opus 4.5 and Gemini Pro. And I've been pretty surprised with how well it's been working. I think getting something up and running and getting that initial scaffolding in place, it makes, and granted, I've only been doing this for personal projects, like just kind of like little side hobby projects, but getting something up and running relatively quickly, maybe something not super complicated, but just something simple up and running relatively quickly to kind of get the ball rolling it's been shocking at just how well it can do that and how quickly it can do that. A few takeaways that I have from this process are there's this idea, and I even mentioned this a little bit last time, where you want to be reviewing all of the code that it's generating because you need to know how things are working. But they're at a certain point, especially if you ask it to do some type of refactor, it is generating so much code that almost the reviewing of it seems overwhelming. Where, if that was something that you wrote from scratch, you kind of know how you're developing it, the design patterns you're following. But when you're just telling something, hey, do this, and it's kind of going, using its own patterns and all of that, you really have to review it, and there becomes a point where it's like review fatigue. So that worries me. I think that's more of a personal thing as opposed to a criticism of AI. But, I went in with the right intention, and there becomes a point where it's like, oh my God, this is a lot to review.
Yeah, I don't think that's even a personal thing. It's like something everyone's experiencing.
Yeah.
If they're using AI to generate the bulk of their code, it becomes absolutely impossible to go through everything that it's doing if you're just trying to make progress. It's just too much, and like no reasonable person can at some point review every single thing it's doing to create something good, at least as far as I can tell.
Yeah. And I think this also goes back to our last video where you talk about, the need for senior, engineers is going to be even greater. I think this is a case where, that kind of proves that, where if you have all this code that's being generated, you might need more people to be reviewing it and just making sure things are, on track. And, it'll be curious to see where this goes over the next year and, how far the review process comes. Maybe they'll start coming out with tools that can help with the reviewing, and
God help us.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's already happening where senior engineers are being put into these roles of code reviewer more than engineer. And while, junior level people are generating mass amounts of pull requests, and people are equating it to becoming a software janitor because you're just combing through mountains of pull requests. The code might be garbage, and the fatigue is real there too. You might stop, being as diligent as you need to be, which is dangerous.
Yeah. On that note, I did notice, like I said, the AI tooling was really good at getting the scaffolding set up. But then when I ran into my first issue, my goal for this project was to try to not do any type of intervention in terms of coding and just see how far the tool could get. Because this was, like I said, a hobby project. This was nothing that is being sold or marketed. This is just a personal use thing. So my goal was, how far could AI get on its own without having me intervene and, either write code or really give it specific guidance instructions. And it came across a bug, which it was one of those issues where I've seen it before. I kind of know what the solution is. And when I asked it, I just gave it a description like, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Can you fix it? The solution it generated to solve that bug was really complicated when in reality, it was like a config setting it needed to adjust. But instead of just adjusting that, it built out this whole system just to solve that issue. And if you didn't know better and you just accepted that code, would it work? Yeah. But is that the right solution? I don't think so. And you still really need to know what you're doing.
For sure. And that is a concern, and it's something we've seen people kind of relent to elsewhere online, saying they're just going to give up and let it create okay code that works. It might not be perfect, it might not be good even, but if it works and it's done quickly, they're just moving on. And that, I don't know about that trajectory for software. It's like a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
And kind of cutting through the hype. I don't know. It's probably not common for everyone's Twitter feed to be like ours, where it's just a bombardment of AI hype train and, a million different tools. And, oh my God, this is life-changing and this is amazing. We can do so much with it. On that note, though, I kind of feel like the marketing behind some of these big AI companies, I feel like they're paying people to post these things and boost the hype and keep this hype train alive as long as they can, because there can't be this many people talking about these tools every second of the day. It seems impossible. That's all my feed is. But cutting through the hype, I think a lot of the examples of what people are using AI coding tools for today are hobby projects, which skews the reality of what software engineering is, because what's fine for a hobby project or a demo or a prototype or whatever is not fine for a deliverable for like a client or for your own enterprise or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a hobby project is much different than an enterprise software solution. And maybe you don't always need an enterprise software solution, but if you're working with a big enterprise, you kind of need that. So
yeah, and you have to be a lot more careful.
Yeah.
So in my experience, I've been working on this quite a bit as well, and I've used it in a variety of use cases. So I've created projects similar to your experiments with hobby projects. I just had some ideas for tools that I could use, I think would be useful, but not useful enough that I'm willing to put in the time to actually think it through and create it. So I tried to see what AI could come up with. I did spend a pretty significant amount of time in the planning phase. And everyone will tell you this, but the more thought and instruction and guardrails you give the AI agent, the better the product is going to be. But at some point, you just got to put code down. And when you're creating a project from scratch, you wrap your head around like a core piece and you get going and you build that piece. And you might not fully know all the other parts yet and how they're going to fit in. And you have to kind of resolve that as you develop the project. When you're doing it with AI from scratch and letting it generate the code from the beginning, if you don't have that full plan totally formulated, it's going to go in the wrong direction. It might give you exactly what you're asking for, but no thought into how it's going to expand or how it's going to add additional features in any coherent way.
Yeah.
And so what I've seen is I built 2 projects letting it generate the code from scratch. And like we talked about, the review fatigue was just too much. I just let it go because it wasn't critical. I just wanted to see what it could do. And man, it did not do great, I don't think. Like, it was impressive in some of the parts that it was able to get up and running pretty quickly, but the amount of problems were immense. There's very simple things that just didn't work. At one point, I was arguing with the AI bot about something that didn't exist. There was like, I needed a setting page for something. It wasn't there. It wasn't there in the app. And I was like, well, where do I go to my settings? How do I get to this? I need to be able to enter an API key here. And it's like, oh, well, you click on the settings menu at the bottom of the home screen. You can put it in there. And I say, okay, problem. There is no settings button on the bottom of the home screen. And it would argue with me and say, it's there. It's at the bottom of the screen. You just have to click it. It's the first item. And I'll load it up. It's not there. And then I'll tell it, it's still not there. There's no visibility. I can't click on it. There's no way to get to settings. And then it'll come back and say, tell me I'm wrong. And I don't like that. Like, I don't want this thing arguing with me. So like, that was a little frustrating.
You don't know what you're seeing.
Right. Yeah. Like maybe I'm blind. I'm not sure. But then like simple things, it would actually complete some features partially. And then it would not figure out how to wire up buttons to actually get to the feature. So just like common sense things you would need. If I tell it I need a way to attach a task to a project, for example, it would create the CRUD for a project and a task. It would make a button, for example, to add a project to a task or vice versa. But then it wouldn't add an on-click event to actually do anything. So they'd just be dead buttons. And that's what I ran into just over and over.
I've come across similar things as well.
Yeah. And because I was experimenting the way you were, where I was trying not to manually intervene, I just had to keep prompting it to fix these very obvious things that just make up software. And that started to just eat through my token quota so fast because of its boneheaded mistakes that I would get 15 minutes out of my Claude Pro subscription, and then I'd have to wait 5 hours to do anything else if I wanted to continue. Like, that's not a great experience.
Yeah, that's another thing that I've been struggling with a little is with some of the different models. You read a lot of hype online, kind of going back to what you were saying, how people are just constantly hyping these things, where, I've read multiple people say that, Gemini Pro is great for the code generation, but there's other things better for planning. So I was using Claude Opus for some of the planning portions, and then I would switch to Gemini Pro. But then that would, like, the Gemini Pro part of it would introduce all these bugs. So then I just kind of started from scratch, had Claude plan it, and then Claude also implement it. And the code was significantly better. But it's kind of like, I don't know what to choose, because, people are saying one thing and you've got all this, all this evidence and all these white papers saying one thing, but then in actual reality, I'm not seeing it with my, very limited experience. So it could have just been a fluke thing, but it's hard to know what the best choice is sometimes.
It is. And especially if you don't have unlimited budget, because you can't buy like a max subscription to every single model, or at least that wouldn't be super reasonable.
Yeah.
And they keep adjusting how these quotas work too. It's very opaque. And there was times when I would get hours of prompting out of my Claude Pro subscription. Other days I would get minutes, like very few minutes. Yeah. And there's really no way to judge like how much work you can actually get done with a certain quota, because it fluctuates based on like how many people are using it, what their resources available are, is it a peak time? And they've been slowly making it worse. In fact, even the output, I feel like, has gotten dramatically worse toward the end of this month versus December. Like in December, I was seeing some pretty amazing results. In January, I'm not seeing that same level of quality or capability out of the exact same tool, which is kind of scary. Because if you're going to dedicate yourself to using these tools to produce code, you have no control over the tuning of these models, and they're changing all the time. And you are pinning yourself to one of these models for, your entire setup, everything you've learned about it. And by the day, it can be changed by the company who's running it, and you're just at the whims of their changes.
Yeah. I think sometimes I also struggle with the prompting of it. And like, I feel like there is a fine line of giving it too much information, not giving it enough information. Like, I don't know. And also in terms of planning some of these features, is it better to kind of do it the way we typically do it, where we, especially at the start of a project, you look at one specific thing and kind of start there? Is it better to just have it do that without giving it any other knowledge, or to give it all the knowledge and have it start there? I've had mixed results. One of the projects I did, I was just doing these small, finite pieces without really telling it how it would end up connecting. And once I got to a point where I had a few of these small pieces built, I kind of, prompted it and explained how they're all going to work together. And that's one of the times where it had to do a pretty significant refactor, and it generated so much code that it became overwhelming to review.
Yeah, and some people who do this more than we do, that meaning working with AI coding tools, will say that this is a skill issue. But the problem with that statement is that we know how to build software. Like, we are experts at that. Yeah. So it's not a skill issue there. It's a skill issue using whatever today's latest tool is that a responsible software developer might not devote their time to yet until it's been proven. Like, how can we become perfect experts in the Pickle Rick extension with a Ralph Wiggum loop for Claude code? Like, there's these, it's so unserious right now. Yeah. Like, how would I devote my craft to being perfect at prompting that thing when the output is not perfect?
Yeah.
When we know how to write software. So it's hard to go all in. But on that note, what I have found that has worked great for me, and this has been my favorite part of this experiment so far, is so I'm a .NET developer. C# is my main area of expertise. So is yours, I would say. And I have some very large enterprise projects in .NET, and they are pre-existing projects, things that I have built by hand, done right. They work really well. And I brought an AI agent into that project where I've already established the correct way to develop this software. And then I would have it refactor a feature that I needed to expand on and have it stick to the coding patterns that are already in place. And it does a tremendous job at that. In fact, I found these AI agents to work extremely well with C# and .NET, more so than PHP and JavaScript and HTML and Tailwind and all that. I've found C# to be exceptionally good. And that just might be, to the fact that C# is a strongly typed language. People who use it tend to be more in the enterprise space, where a lot of other languages tend to be more vibe coded, have a lot of amateurs like Python, PHP, stuff like that. So the models might be trained on worse data for those languages and better data on C# and .NET. But the results were really good. It saved me a ton of time. And when you bring it into an existing project, and you tend to have it do a specific thing rather than a very broad task. And when it's a specific thing, it's a lot easier to review every single line of code that it changed. And also, you're already familiar with your project structure. It's a lot easier just cognitively to understand what it did and if it fits with your design pattern and if you want it to do that. So like, the review becomes so much easier. You already understand everything. You can see what it did. And I was able to make progress maybe 10 times faster than I would have by writing the code myself. And it did a great job. It stuck to what I already programmed. And then it comes down to testing and just making sure it works well. And one additional thing that has been great with that process is that it is recommending and using data structures that I didn't even know existed, because we've been doing, C# since it was born.
Yeah.
Now we're up to .NET 10. Things have changed dramatically. There's tons of new things that I don't even know about. It's hard to keep up with. And it'll implement a feature using something I've never even seen before. And then I'll go read about it and be like, wow, this is actually a great implementation. It's way better than the way I thought I would do it, because I just didn't even know this existed. So I love that. I think that's been a big thing.
I can't speak too much on just the broad PHP, development in terms of AI, but specifically like Laravel PHP. I have found that Laravel Boost composer package, it does help establish some of the, I think they call them guidelines, to instruct how the Claude and Gemini should structure the code it generates. And it creates like a Claude MD and a Gemini MD file to kind of guide the agents. And it does do a pretty good job. It picks patterns that I would personally use. But like I said, if you're just general PHP development, like if you were doing WordPress or something like that, and you didn't have those good MD files set up with a structure, I'm not sure how it would perform. But yeah, I tend to agree with you. I wonder if the C# AI guidance is better just because it's strongly typed and there's, specific ways that you do things.
That's my main takeaway from these experiments so far, is that if you start building the project yourself and have some foundational hand-built coding done there, then AI works a lot better to work the way you want to work and fit within your design patterns. If you're letting it start from scratch on its own without your intervention, you're probably going to get way too much code to be diligent on the review. Design patterns you either are not familiar with or are just plain wrong, and like just rogue things that it's trying to do that are probably very inefficient, and they might work, but it's not sustainable for like a real product.
Yeah, and I'm surprised too at the number of times where I've seen it do something and I can tell like this is clearly not performance oriented, and I'll prompt it and kind of give it a hint like, hey, this section, can you boost the performance of this section? And maybe I'll give a little more technical detail of what I'm seeing, and it's like, oh yeah, I can do that. That's a great suggestion. And it's like, why didn't you do that in the first place?
Yeah.
Like, it was clearly something that you should not. Maybe it's not that you should not do it, but you wouldn't do it that way. And then you prompt it and explain the better way to do it, and it's like, oh yeah, that's obvious. And well, yeah, why didn't you do it that way?
I know. I hope as these coding agents mature that there's a model that isn't such like a yes man. And actually, I don't even want it to talk to me at all. I want just direct communication. I know you can prompt it with some system guidelines saying like keep it direct, don't add fluff, whatever. But I just don't like having to do that every single time. I just want a coding agent. I don't need a chatbot. I don't need someone telling me how awesome everything is and saying how great its bugs are and telling me things exist that don't exist.
Yeah, and I don't want something that's always telling me my suggestions are great, because, we always don't have the best answer. There could be something better. I don't want it to every single time be like, oh, that's a great idea, let's do it this way. And it's, no, push back. Tell me, like that's what's so nice about working with you and the team here, is that, it's very common that one of us suggests something and someone has, is just more familiar with maybe some of the tools and has a better way to do it. And we can push back at one another and, come up with a better solution. So,
yeah. And we're kind of at risk of losing that if everything goes this way and you don't have, peers that you can actually bounce ideas off and see another perspective. So that's a little scary too.
Yeah.
My last takeaway from these experiments on the success side has been, again, back to performance. Like you said, I had a project that is probably about a year old that I created with performance in mind. I did things the best way that I could think of to create the most performant version of this one particular part of an application. And then out of curiosity, I asked the agent, I was using Copilot in Visual Studio for this one, to review each of my classes that needed this performance and offer me suggestions for improving the performance. And when I did that, it not only offered alternatives, it created benchmarks for the current state, benchmarks for its suggestion, generated a whole report of the before and after performance changes. And I think I showed you that, and I was like, this is awesome. Like it improved one of my functions by 10x and showed the proof, and also wrote tests for it to make sure it still worked exactly the same, just faster. And that is awesome.
Yeah. And I think that, hearing you say that, and I remember when you showed me that, it's interesting because, a bunch of stuff I've said today has been like criticizing AI. It is useful, and depending on the use case, it might get something really right or it might get something really wrong. And I feel like some people lose that gray area where if you criticize one thing about AI, it's, oh, you're against AI, or, even vice versa. If you praise it for something that it did really well. And I just think we're in this time where it's very interesting. Like, it's been really cool using these tools. The results I've had are great. But it's not black and white. There's a lot of gray in this space, and I don't want to lose that in the discussion. And, I think we've both done a good job of saying the things it's done wrong and the things it's done well. And I think that's kind of where we're at. And without, I've said it so many times, without that knowledge, you're at the whim of some of these models, and, also your ability to prompt it and prompting it correctly. And I think we're all still kind of figuring that out.
Yeah, it's early days. We have to cut through the hype and see what like really works, and where it can be helpful, and watch out for where it is not helpful. Beware of all of the people out there saying how great everything is when really they're working on hobby projects or, prototypes like you and I both have. That is not the real world. Like, it's great that you can make that. It does speed it up. It gives you ideas. That's my favorite part about it. It does things in a way I might not have even considered. But you still have to bring it back to reality and create something that is good if it's a real product. Yeah. So that's where we're at today. I think that there's a long way to go. And back to my previous point, it's hard for any serious professional to go all in on it at this stage and make it a huge focus of their time to just be good at these tools that are still evolving so fast. It might not even be around anymore once you get really good at it, or it'll change so much that your skills have to change. So as a professional software engineer, keep doing what you're doing in your normal workflow. Feather in AI and use it where it works, and continue to play with it. But in my opinion, you can't go all in on it as a professional at this point. Maybe it will evolve, but as of today, it's a helpful assistant sometimes. It's a nuisance other times. It can't be your full-time job, basically, prompting AI to make good software.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.